Okay, so I'm finally back home and I wanted to do a video post and probably a post on my blog about my road trip by the numbers. So, on my trip from Fort Myers, Florida to Abilene, Texas, I drove 1,576 miles over 4 days. I visited 11 superchargers and I learned a lot about traveling with the Model S. So to start the trip, I flew on Thursday from Abilene to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, from Dallas-Fort Worth to Fort Myers Airport on Thursday. I learned that American Airlines seats are nowhere near as comfortable as my Teslas. Once in Fort Myers, I was picked up by the car's current owner, and we went to the bank and we transferred lots of money around. Then I took him home to Cape Coral, and the car was mine. So I left Cape Coral around 3 p.m. and traveled north. My first charge was at the Tampa Supercharger, which is actually in Brandon, Florida. I logged 114 miles that day, and my first day behind the wheel. Now it was time for a real day of travel. 550 miles and 5 superchargers on Friday. Ocala, Lake City, Tallahassee, and Defunction, Florida. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, guys from that city in Florida. And the final stop was Mobile, Alabama that day, where I arrived just as the first night of Mardi Gras was ending in downtown Mobile, Alabama. That was an interesting experience. The next morning it was time to cross multiple states. I exited Alabama and crossed Mississippi without stopping. This was the longest chunk between Mobile, Alabama and Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which was 207 miles, and where I arrived at the Baton Rouge Supercharger. The trip continued where I stopped at Lake Charles's Supercharger, and I arrived at my friend's house near downtown Houston, having traveled about 500 miles on Saturday. Sunday morning, after giving my first show-off ride in the car, I continued on to the North Houston Supercharger and filled up. Then I went to Huntsville, Alabama, and finally to my favorite supercharger, the one in Waco at the Collins Street Bakery. It was also my last supercharger, and even the car was worried about my making it to Abilene directly. Fully charged at 254 miles, I drove 65 miles the entire way from Waco to Abilene, going 195 miles and arriving with 28 miles to spare. Day 4 logged in at 565 miles total. People talk a lot about range anxiety with the Model S, and most drivers will tell you it's not that big a deal. You always have lots of range, and that is so true if you have a supercharger in your future. If you're driving like I was from Waco to Abilene and there's no supercharger, even the car is worried about it. It's telling you, drive 55, drive no more than 60, and you might make it. And that can be range anxiety inducing. Plus, it just doesn't really like to go somewhere where it's on the edge and there's no supercharger in the future. But the only alternative besides making that one trek from Abilene to Waco was to go Waco to Denton to Abilene, and that's hundreds of miles more. Truth is, I don't think I would have made it Waco to Abilene if I had had any range-eating obstacles. Like, for instance, if it had been raining, I probably wouldn't have made it, because rain actually makes you have less range, because you have to use more energy to travel in the rain than you do without. So that's my trip from Fort Myers, Florida to Abilene, Texas over 4 days. And there will be lots more videos about my experience having the Model S. Right now I'm waiting for my electricians to finally show up and install my 220. In the meantime, my car is currently charging off of a standard outlet. It's getting 4 miles to the hour, and since this morning when I moved my car, it's added 6 miles. So right now I have 47. It's kind of crazy. And I also learned that 120 outlet on my in my backyard is hooked up to the light, because I plugged my car in last night. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get 4 miles an hour. It'll be overnight. I'll have 30 when I get up in the morning. Then I had a little insomnia around 2 a.m. I look at my Tesla app and I'm like, it's not charging. Why is it? Matter of fact, the miles are going down. Why are the miles going down? So I go out to the car and I turn the light on and I go out and the car's charging. And I'm like, what? It is charging. What's the deal? Well, I look at it, and it's just now started charging. And so I'm like, wait a minute. And I go and I turn the light off, and the charger turns off. And I'm like, oh, crap. So turn the light on. So it had a little time last night to charge and a little time this morning to charge. But it says, it will take me all day, 21 hours to get to half full of the car. So not so great on 120. So I'm hoping the electricians show up. They said they'd be here in the morning. and it is now 10 a.m. So I guess, you know, if you're here before noon, you're in the morning. So that's another story of Ron and his Model S out in West Texas now. Bye.